NASA's ice-hunting moon rover is preparing for launch. SpaceX tests a new astronaut escape plan, new problems arise for the Orion crew capsule, and doctors on Earth use remote control robots for surgery in space. NASA is deep into preparations for their next moon landing attempt with the Viper rover in 2024, a key resource scouting mission for future human activity on the lunar surface. The Volatile's Investigating Polar Exploration rover is a semi-automated vehicle that NASA built to sniff out pockets of water ice in permanently shadowed craters of the lunar South Pole, water here being the Volatile's part of Viper's name. Currently, NASA says that the rover is about 80% complete and is nearing the pivotal testing period that will demonstrate if the vehicle can withstand being loaded onto a rocket and shot into space, as well as its ability to land on the moon, which, as we've seen recently, can be easier said than done. The rover will use a 1-meter-long drill bit to investigate the lunar soil composition at varying depths, creating our first ever detailed resource map of the moon. The mission is scheduled for November of this year, so being only 80% complete actually seems like the Viper team is cutting it a bit close in the general timeline for NASA's certification process. But the team mentions that the pace of building the rover has actually been proceeding very quickly lately, and that's due in part to the way that Viper is being constructed. Every time NASA installs a new subsystem on Viper, they immediately complete something called a channelization test. These tests are made to just ensure that the installed system actually works as intended. So the test could be anything from checking the electrical signals along the correct pathways to using its antenna to instruct the rover to take a picture and diagnosing that whole chain of events. In this way, a lot of the testing is done as the team completes installations, and so there's not a whole lot of time lost on going back later to do this sort of certification work. Well, NASA was quick to stress that these aren't simple systems to work with, and so testing as you go is really the most efficient way of making sure you've done the job correctly. Some things are harder to test on the ground, however, and we'll only know for sure how they perform once Viper is on the moon, where it will spend 100 days navigating the temperature swings between the hot lunar day and the permanently frozen shadow regions where water ice is thought to reside. Using a combination of AI algorithms like Sherpa and a ground team, NASA hopes that Viper will be able to complete its mission to scout an area that will become the future landing site for missions like Artemis 3 and beyond. Sherpa specifically is being used right now to make the initial plans for routes and work times, maximizing the available power for Viper during its mission, but the algorithm will really be put to the test once it has to make improvised plans on the lunar South Pole. Viper will give valuable data on what landing sites for future Artemis missions are safe and close to useful resources, so let's hope the Viper team can use the lessons from recent attempts like the IM-1 and SLIM to make a successful landing later this year. On February 26, SpaceX conducted a test of their new astronaut escape system for the tower at Space Launch Complex 40 at the Kennedy Space Center in Florida. The system being put through its spaces has a similar function to those zip-line baskets that NASA uses on other crew-rated towers, including the ones installed at Pad 39A, where SpaceX already runs cargo and crewed missions with their Falcon 9 rocket, but instead of using a basket supported by anchored cables to glide crew to safety, SpaceX has decided to go with a massive slide. In the video of its first deployment, we can see the slide spring from a storage box at the top of the tower at SLC 40. It's hard to make out from the distance, but this slide is designed to unfold along two guide cables that have been anchored to a point far enough from the tower that any crew needing to use the slide to escape a potential mishap on the tower wouldn't be harmed. The particular test was just to see if the slide can unfurl properly, but the next test will be completed with a cargo mission before attempting anything with a live crew. According to the SpaceX Vice President of Build and Flight Reliability, Bill Gerstenmaier, this next test is likely to be done during one of the company's commercial resupply services flights to the ISS, specifically CRS-30, which is currently scheduled for about the middle of March and would leave the team plenty of time to prepare the rig. The tower at Pad 40 is being prepared for crewed missions using the SpaceX Dragon capsule and is an expansion to the current SpaceX pad network that both SpaceX and NASA are looking forward to. Joel Montalbano, NASA's program manager for the ISS, says that this year we'll have 17 missions to the space station, and trying to schedule all of those around other missions like the recent IM-1 lunar lander mission is a daunting task. Getting a second tower certified for Dragon capsule launches, both for cargo and crewed, would go a long way to providing options for scheduling those vital resupply missions to the ISS, not to mention that always important redundancy that NASA looks for. Using a recent aerospace safety advisory panel, NASA made some public updates on the status of Artemis mission hardware, specifically the Orion capsule that will be used on the recently delayed Artemis 2 mission. Addressing the public on February 28, William Bray spoke for NASA and made specific mention of two issues that are currently taking up the bulk of the team's time. The first of these has to do with some issues with Orion's side hatch design. Bray wasn't very specific about the issue that raised some alarms for Artemis engineers, but he did say that whatever the problem was, it had the potential to hinder contingency operations either on the launch pad or after the capsule lands back home in the ocean. Digging a little deeper here, we find reference to this hatch issue in the ASAP annual report, which was released in January when the Artemis 2 and 3 missions were delayed. The report makes reference to the delta pressure capability of the hatch, most likely describing a problem that the door hardware is having with operating properly once the pressure differential is not equal inside and outside the pod. That would definitely be a problem if crew members needed to open the door for whatever reason, but both the January report and Bray's update last week make mention of plans to extensively test this issue with the help of the astronaut office and expect it to only take 6 to 9 months to figure out. Of more immediate concern is the problem with the Orion's heat shield losing more material or char than it was supposed to during the Artemis I mission's re-entry. From Bray's description though, the team is very close to fixing this issue and found that it seems to have something to do with the density and composition of the heat shield's coating material. Bray said NASA is confident that the heat shield investigation should be completed inside the next month or so, which will allow the Artemis 2 mission team to start calculating the re-entry trajectories, but will also free some of the team up to look at this hatch problem. All told, Bray said that he doesn't believe either of these issues are showstoppers for Artemis 2, so we'll just have to wait and see what NASA finds out about their capsule over the next couple of months. On February 11, a robot arm was activated and allowed doctors on the ground to perform a simulated surgery on the International Space Station. Space Mira is a creation of the University of Nebraska and is a compact robotic device that includes a camera and 2 arms that can be fitted with gripping and cutting tools used in surgeries. Space Mira is a test for remote operations using a very efficient and compact device. In fact, the box it gets transported in is about the size of a microwave. The 2-hour test was completed by 6 surgeons and used Mira's arms to grab and cut a series of rubber bands. The only issue was of course the slight signal lag, about 0.85 seconds, but the doctors were able to complete the tasks with very few interruptions. Robotic arms and other devices have been used to assist surgeries or even allow for remote surgeries for years now, but the Space Mira test proves that signal strength is at least good enough to allow for a ground team to medically support stations in low Earth orbit. To say nothing of the portability of the robot itself. The goal of this test was partially to see how well the Space Mira rig could operate in microgravity, where every push and pull could throw off the calibrations used to make the machine work properly. But the biggest goal was definitely to see if an apparatus of this sensitivity could be made this small and be portable. The team from Nebraska is intending on using this test to gain funding for more testing in remote places on Earth, which is probably the safest use of this tech, but obviously it could very easily be used to help our operations in Earth orbit at least. Medical training for our space crews is very stringent, and recent efforts have been made to ease the pressure for medical staff in space to be trained in almost everything just in case. If they could have support from the ground, crew medics wouldn't have to be such highly trained individuals anymore, or at least they wouldn't have to shoulder that medical burden alone up there. Unfortunately, that problem with signal lag will only get worse the further away from Earth our crews get, so this isn't a solution for supporting our operations on the Moon or Mars, but for remote locations planet-side. And for the several new space stations being designed to take over for the aging ISS, this is a huge leap. And that's about it for today's episode. Thank you so much for tuning in, and that's all for today's update. If you enjoyed watching and found it useful, please make sure to subscribe to my channel and hit the like button. And if you want to support our channel and if you want to be up to date, you can become an exclusive member, so click on our perks through the link in the description below. Thanks to watching and see you next time.